Shalom, I am Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries, and I'm excited because today is Lesson 7 in our series on the Moedim, Unveiling Divine Appointments, Echoes of Redemption in the Feast Days. Lesson 7 is thrilling for me because this is the last lesson on Passover. We have considered Passover in the last two lessons. We're going to wrap up our Passover study today. Lesson 7 is called The Flavor of Freedom in Passover. For Messiah followers, freedom is inherently linked to redemption. His Moedim, or feast days, are a rhythm of redemption, beginning with Passover. Joy in his redemption and love is the reason we celebrate Passover. For the sake of love, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is a traditional Sabbath reading before Passover. Passover highlights our love relationship with our Redeemer. Redemption is the meta-narrative, the big story of the Bible. The deepest roots of biblical history, beginning in Genesis 1, verse 2, are filled with patterns of exile and redemption. The only reason for a pattern like this is the Father's unfathomable love. As we celebrate Passover every year, he affirms his redemption and his love for us. After the Passover in Egypt, Moshe and the Israelites sing of his redeeming love. In Exodus 15, verse 13, they sing, "In your unfailing love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling." This song influences every song in Scripture. The Song of Moshe is also a portrait of a future time. It depicts how the Almighty brings his people out of bondage and redeems them at the time of the anti-Messiah or Antichrist. So the essence of this song is sung again according to Revelation 15, verse 3. It says, "And they sing the song of Moshe, the servant of Elohim, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are your works, Adonai El Shaddai. Righteous and true are your ways, O King of the nations." Passover concerns redemption and freedom from exile. According to a divine plan, the DNA of Passover is a pattern of exile and redemption. In Hebrew, exile and redemption come from the same two-letter root spelled Gimel Lamed. Exile is the Hebrew word golah. You can hear the Gimel Lamed in there. The Ga and the Ul are the Gimel Lamed. So we've got golah as the Hebrew word for exile, and the word for redemption is almost the same word. Redemption is the Hebrew word geulah. The only difference between golah or exile and geulah or redemption is the single letter aleph. Aleph is the first Hebrew letter, and it can signify Alufo Shel Olam, master of the universe. Inserting the letter aleph into golah brings the master of the universe into our exile. Our Redeemer, who is symbolized in the letter aleph, transforms golah into geulah and works redemption from exile. In our own lives, we may feel enslaved in exile. We may be stuck in some miserable situation. We may be struggling for freedom. Finally, we are liberated from the situation. We may never know why we suffered, but we feel redeemed. True and lasting redemption requires the love of our great Redeemer. Redeeming love is the profound message of Passover. We are reminded of our freedom every year during a Passover Seder and the fact that we are made free by his redeeming love. Our Redeemer is eternal in his being. He's immutable in his counsel. He's faithful to his covenant, and he is able to fulfill his covenant. The Holy One explains this in very clear terms to Moshe prior to that first Passover in Egypt. In Exodus 6, verses 6 through 8, he confirms, I will bring you out. I will rid you of their bondage. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people. I will be your God. I will bring you into the land. I will give it to you as a heritage. Sometimes it is hard for us to comprehend how rich and glorious these promises are. In biblical Hebrew, they're written in the past perfect tense. They're not future tense verbs. A perfect verb normally describes actions which have occurred in the past, or actions which are seen as completed. Consequently, these are not future promises for a future day. No, these promises are already accomplished. The Almighty's great redemption in the Passover Exodus is already faultlessly executed. God, who is outside of time and space, has already redeemed. Now that's pretty profound information about that passage in Exodus 6, verses 6 through 8. And here is another piece of information about that passage that is so profound and so exciting, I can barely contain myself. There are actually prominent parallels between our lives and those promises which lead into the Passover Exodus. His first promise in Exodus 6, 6 through 8 is bringing the Israelites out from under heavy burdens. Now the Israelites labor in the harshest conditions under physically exhausting work. Likewise, we experience burdens today. Whether or not we're doing backbreaking work, therefore Yeshua's promise, which is based upon the burdens of the Israelite slaves, addresses every type of burden we might experience. Yeshua says in Matthew 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The next promise in Exodus 6, 6 through 8 is ridding the Israelites of bondage. The Egyptians are a powerful people. The Israelites cannot break their shackles. They live in a suffocating set of circumstances. Without Adonai's help, their bondage will remain. Now, what about our personal cycle of bondage? If we're not willing to shema, to listen and obey, this is sin. And this kind of sin can become a cycle of bondage for us. But Yeshua rids us of our bondage. The Messiah grants liberty to all who trust him. Galatians 5:1 states, "In the freedom with which Messiah makes us free, stand firm. Do not again be held with a yoke of bondage." Adonai also declares in Exodus 6, 6 through 8, "I will redeem you with an outstretched arm." Passover is the festival of redemption. Because Adonai redeems on Passover, Yeshua also redeems on Passover. He redeems through his sacrificial death. Hebrews 9:12 explains this. It says, "The Messiah entered into the most set-apart place once for all, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, having obtained everlasting redemption." Another promise Adonai makes in Exodus 6, 6 through 8 is to take the Israelites as his people. The Spirit of Messiah, speaking through Rabbi Paul, repeats this claim. Rabbi Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7:23, "You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men." And the reason he says this is because the Father has taken us for his people. Now, in preparation for the coming Passover, in Exodus 6:6-8, Adonai also declares, "I will be your God." Pharaoh's Egypt has many gods, as does our world today. But Adonai is the only true creator God. Therefore, he repeats this promise for us. 1 Corinthians 8, verses 5 and 6 explains, "For even if there are so-called gods, either in heaven or on earth, as in fact there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is only one God, the Father, from whom all things come and for whom we exist, and one Lord, Yeshua the Messiah, through whom were created all things and through whom we have our being." This passage tells us that Adonai is the creator and Yeshua the living word essence of creation. We owe our allegiance and our obedience to them. Another declaration which Adonai makes before that first Passover in Egypt is that he brings his people to their own land. It is a long trek to freedom for the Israelites. They are marching toward a horizon with infinite possibilities, but they must do the walking. They must move at his command. Likewise, our trek may be filled with perils. We may be locked in conflict with the forces of this world. Nevertheless, we are the people who shema. We listen for his directions and we obey. We have to walk out the journey at his command. Hebrews 3, verses 14-16 clarifies. We are sharers in the Messiah if we keep the beginning of our commitment firm until the end. Now, where it says today, if you hear God's voice, don't harden your hearts as you did in the bitter quarrel. Who were the people who provoked him? Indeed, all those whom Moshe brought out of Egypt. We are friends and partners with Yeshua if we keep the beginning of our faith unto the goal of our faith. Yeshua is the author and the goal of our faith, the sustainer of our integrity, our righteousness, and our hope. How do we keep the beginning of our commitment firm to the end? By realizing that we do not keep our commitment alone. He partners with us. He keeps us unto himself. All of this happens in what Hebrews 3:15 calls today. The biblical today is the believer's eternal present. Adonai's final Passover promise in Exodus 6:6-8 is to give the Israelites an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. As Messiah followers, we also inherit. 1 Peter 1, verses 3 and 4 proclaims this. It states, "Blessed be the Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah, who according to his great compassion has caused us to be born again to a living expectation through the resurrection of Yeshua Messiah from the dead, to an inheritance, incorruptible and undefiled and unfading, having been kept safe for you in the heavens." The opening words here, I want to talk about those opening words, but I want to remind you that this passage tells us we have an inheritance. just like the Israelites long ago. And the opening words are a brakah. Blessed be the Elohim and Father of our Master Yeshua Messiah. This is the pattern for commencing a brakah, a Hebrew blessing. So this passage, which concerns our inheritance and that opens with a blessing for the Father, is really quite revealing. This is what it tells us. Obviously, an inheritance blesses us, but it also blesses him to give us an inheritance. And this is the reason that Kepha opened that passage with a blessing for the Father. It blesses the Father to give us an inheritance. And it blessed him to give the Israelites an inheritance. The promises the Israelites receive in Exodus 6 through 8 before Passover in Egypt parallel the promises we receive in King Messiah. We discover more of the flavor of freedom in Passover when we consider the individual letters in the word Pesach, the Hebrew word for Passover. Pesach is spelled Pe-Samach Het. Pe signifies mouth, speech, and vessel. Three meanings for the letter Pe work in tandem in Matthew 12, verse 34. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Our vessel is our heart. The heart motivates the mouth and speech. The words stored inside our vessel are the words our mouths will speak. Speaking blessings reinforces redemption. Speaking curses reinforces bondage. Samach, the second letter in Pesach, signifies to support, to lean upon, and to uphold. Its root signifies the laying on of hands, hands to consecrate a sacrifice and hands to consecrate the priesthood. This supports the term Pesach, since the very Levites who are passed over in Egypt are later consecrated by the laying on of hands as the priesthood of Israel. Moreover, the letter Samach has a numeric value of 60. This is the very same numeric value as the Hebrew word for vessel. So once again, God is emphasizing the contents in our vessel. The third letter in Pesach is the letter Het, and Het signifies life. The life of the Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, the Passover lambs, is poured out at the thresholds in Egypt. When the Israelites applied the lamb's blood around the door frames of their houses, they actually draw the letter Het. And the letter Het means life. Combining these definitions, the term Pesach communicates a message. Do the contents in our vessels consist of leaven, which is a symbol of sin, or are the contents unleavened, which is a symbol of obedience? When we allow Him to write the words of His covenant upon our hearts, we have covenant treasure inside our vessels. Covenant words in our mouths is something tangible enough to taste. His redeeming love, His redeeming covenant tastes like freedom and resembles the flavor of freedom in Passover. Now, in conclusion, outside of redemption and freedom, there are a few Passover sub-themes that we need to consider because they're designed to inspire us and our families. The first sub-theme is recognizing the hand of God. God performs many signs and wonders in preparation for Passover. He says in Exodus 7 verse 5, "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand upon Egypt." He is not just interested in the shalom or welfare of his people. He's interested in Egypt. He wants them to know. He wants Egypt and ultimately the entire world to know that He is the one all-powerful God. Subtheme number 2 is rebirth. 4 times the Torah declares that Pesach occurs in the month of spring. What is it about spring that is so connected with Passover? Spring concerns rebirth. Plants which die in winter begin to come back to life in the spring. And a similar thing happens to the Israelites during the Passover Exodus. As a people, they are dormant for centuries. Suddenly, the Holy One is there, shaping them into a nation which has its own identity, destiny, and purpose. Thus, Passover is the time of Israel's rebirth. Passover and rebirth in the spring are so vital that God decrees in Exodus 12, verse 2, that the month of the Exodus will forever be the first month of the year on the biblical calendar. In temple days, people anticipate a spiritual rebirth at Passover. And John 11, verse 55 confirms this. This verse gives us a glimpse of the Passover preparations designed to welcome a spiritual rebirth. It says, "Now the Passover of the Yehudim was near, and many went up to Jerusalem from the country prior to the Passover in order to purify themselves." People went up to immerse in a mikveh. Immersion in a mikveh is not for physical hygiene. It's not about taking a bath. In fact, one must be scrupulously clean before entering a mikveh. Their immersion is a spiritual cleansing, which welcomes rebirth. Now, sub-theme number 3 is empathy. The Torah is concerned with the welfare of the helpless, the vulnerable, and the foreigner. Why? Because the Israelites were helpless, vulnerable, and foreigners in Egypt. James 1:27 agrees, declaring that pure and undefiled religion in the sight of Elohim is to visit widows and orphans in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Those are 3 Passover subthemes: recognizing the hand of God, a spiritual rebirth, and empathy for others, especially the vulnerable. I would like to finish with some celebration insight into Passover. The Messiah celebrates Passover again in the future, according to Matthew 26, verse 29. Taking the 4th cup at his last Seder, he said, "I shall not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." So, do we have to celebrate Passover now? Or do we wait until then? I like to think that we don't have to celebrate Passover, but we get to celebrate. Passover is all about love, and love does. Love is an action. A Passover Seder is filled with love. It's filled with beauty and mystery. It draws us into the Exodus story as if we were personally there. It's like walking into the pages of Scripture. The Seder plate creates a culinary retelling of the story using 5 food elements: a fresh herb to represent spring, a bitter herb which God told the Israelites to eat in Egypt on Passover, and salt water for us to remember the tears of the Israelite slaves because they cried tears in slavery. Then there's haroset, which is a rendition of the mortar the slaves used in Egypt. There's also a roasted lamb shank bone to acknowledge the lamb the Israelites families sacrificed for Passover. Through the bitter herb, we taste the bitterness of slavery. Through the sweet haroset, we taste the sweetness of redemption. With the tasting comes scriptures, psalms, and prayers. Everything is printed in a Haggadah or program. Haggadah means the telling because it tells the story of the Passover Exodus and it draws us into the story. Passover is a ceremonial meal which tells the story of the Exodus. It tells the story of Adonai's redeeming love. Adults and children alike participate in the Seder. My book, The Feast of Adonai, contains detailed instructions for a Passover Seder. It tells you everything to do, right down to the quantities of all the elements to put on the table, how much you need for every 6 people. It includes a Messianic Passover Haggadah, which I'm giving you permission to copy and print out for your guests at a Passover table. I'm Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries. Our next lesson opens the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I will see you next time. Shalom.